What's up, everybody? Welcome to the video. Chris Pennell here, going my first look for Week 14 of the NFL season for DraftKings and FanDuel. I just want to give you guys a heads up if I ever miss a video on a Wednesday or Saturday in the upcoming weeks. My wife is due anytime in the next 2 weeks, so I just don't know when that'll be. But anyway, we'll be going position by position, kind of going over our first general thoughts of the entire slate, looking at the matchups, looking at the pricing, and then we'll try to build a lineup as we walk through it. And then, of course, on Saturday, we'll go more in-depth game by game, breaking it all down for cash games, tournaments, when we have more available data to us. So if that all sounds fine and dandy to you, do me a favor, leave a like down below. Sky Champ, brand new. Let's dive right into it. And let me sell myself out a little bit quick, but if you want to check out all the extra content over on my website that I built, you can head over to cpendfs.com or use the link down in the description or the pinned comment. And I do have all the data, projections, and just everything you need in one spot here for all the Sunday slates and the flagship showdowns. So this is the only thing I use each and every single week. It's been an awesome year so far. So hopefully we can close strong. And if you want to try it out, when you do select something you want, they'll give you the first week for free. All right, let's get into it here. And as always, we'll start with the quarterback position. In quite a few decent spots this week, and we do have a couple of really good games, especially some for DFS purposes. But we're going to start with the best real-life game of the week, and maybe for DFS. But it's going to be a little expensive is the only unfortunate thing. But we have the Buffalo Bills facing off versus Cincinnati Bengals. This will be at home in Buffalo. 51.5 point over under. 29.5 total for the Bills. 23.5 for the Cincinnati Bengals. They come in as 5.5 point dogs. But this entire game is going to be what America is watching. Now, me as a Browns fan, they're playing the Titans. I'll be very tempted to just kind of watch the Bills and Bengals this week. We'll figure something out. But you got to like Allen versus the Bengals defense. The only problem with Allen is you never know who to stack with him. It's basically impossible. Sometimes it's just Shakir week. Sometimes it's a random X receiver out there like Shavers. Keon Coleman got activated from the dead. Joshua Palmer was out last week. They brought in Brandon Cooks. They have Gabe Davis now. Good luck. Now, the only thing I will say is if Kincaid is back this week, I like him a lot versus that Bengals defense that's been getting shredded over the middle by tight ends all season long. So if he's back, I like it. If not, probably just Josh Allen naked with Cincy run backs, I think make the most sense. Or we could just play James Cook, but we'll talk about him in the next section. As for Joe Burrow, it's very easy to stack with him because you know where the ball is going for the most part. Jamar Chase or T. Higgins. Now we have to make sure T. Higgins gets cleared from concussion protocol. But assuming that is going to be the case, stacks all around. It's going to be a tad bit expensive, of course, but I think you can probably make it work this week. And I want to mention with Allen, over the past few weeks, I've said that the pricing for quarterbacks this year has just been so extremely soft where they're kind of capping out the top guy around $7,000. But as you've seen in recent weeks, they have upped that for Josh Allen. He's getting closer to $8,000. My FanDuel still has him around that usual $9,000 price tag. And then another fun game here with the Los Angeles Rams facing off versus Arizona Cardinals. They will be on the road in Arizona. And then Jacoby Brissett, who is just a DFS machine, comes in at $5,700. Still a really nice price tag over on FanDuel as well at $7,200. Very low total this week, and they are 8.5 point dogs. So we did see the Rams defense on the road last week be a little bit beatable. And of course, the Carolina Panthers got the upset. So the thing for me is this seems like a pretty good game script for Jacoby Brissett, what we have seen in recent weeks, where they play from behind early. They throw the ball a ton. Jacoby Brissett completes a lot of passes to any of his options like Trey McBride, Marvin Harrison Jr., who we saw him use early on, did get hurt. If he happens to be out, we're right back to just peppering Michael Wilson and Trey McBride, which, no offense to Marvin Harrison, I said this last week, but if you could sit another week, I would love to just do the nice little triple stack there with Brissett, McBride, and Michael Wilson, and I will take my points. And on the flip side, if you're using Matthew Stafford, Puka Nacua, Devontae Adams, who's been a touchdown machine in recent weeks, I'm perfectly fine with. And I want to mention specifically on FanDuel, love Matthew Stafford's price point. That seems way too cheap at $8,000. Well, I shouldn't say way too cheap because I'm comparing it to Josh Allen, but I do think with his touchdown upside in this spot versus Arizona and the high implied team total, it does seem a tad bit cheap and probably someone I would definitely get to in the stacks, while expensive, are easy to make, if that makes any sense. All right. After that, I don't think we have any quarterbacks that are in the same game, so kind of just one-offs here. I like the Bo Nix price tag versus the Raiders. I'm not really in love with that game, but I do think stacks with Bo Nix will be quite easy versus that Raiders beatable defense. Baker Mayfield, he obviously has been on a skid a bit and not playing like he was in the early portion of the season, but at $5,100 with the high implied team total versus the New Orleans Saints, I think we can kind of make it work, but I'll be honest, if we were making cuts for who's making this list, I would say he's one of the first guys on the chopping block for me here. And at $7,900 on FanDuel, I would much rather play Matthew Stafford. I would much rather play Jacoby Brissett at the discount. So that's the only issue for me there. And then after that, I think we just have Sam Darnold and Tyrod Taylor, who honestly a really good option at quarterback last week. I think it was him and Jacoby Brissett as the main money makers. He's cheap. He's playing the Miami Dolphins. The stacks are pretty cheap too with A.D. Mitchell, John Mechie, Mason Taylor, so I'm fine with him. Then as for Sam Darnold, got banged up a little bit in the last game, just for a little bit, came back in, of course, and they just demolished the Minnesota Vikings. I should say the Seattle defense demolished Max Brosmer, if anything. But they're going to be playing the Falcons here, high implied team total. They will be on the road, but I mean, Darnold with JSN is a very fine, just skinny stack to do. All right, getting to the build here, and of course, I do this for fun. It's Tuesday. Don't copy this, guys. We're just trying to build a lineup with some stacks and try to see what it looks like at the end using the players we talked about. But at quarterback, it's kind of wide open for me this week. I would tell you, I'd love to play a Matthew Stafford stack, but once I looked at the price tags for Puka Nacua, Devontae Adams, Trey McBride, that's not happening. I mean, if we go with Stafford here, we plug in Puka, we plug in Devontae Adams, and say you want to run it back with Trey McBride, that is an impossible feat. We're left with just under $4,000, and we got to throw in some running backs. And even if you take some mid running backs here, like I'm just going to click names. These two, I mean, you're already dead. So that's just not going to happen this week, unfortunately. So we're going to go a little bit cheaper overall, which I know he's still going to have expensive wide receivers, but we're going to go with Joe Burrow here. We can plug in Jamar Chase. If T. Higgins plays, we can put him into, but I still think it's going to be doable. All right, moving on to running backs. Kind of a tough week this week at the position because I think there's basically a stretch probably from Judkins up to Bucky Irving. They all look the same exact play this week. The volume will be similar. The projections will be similar. Honestly, it's just a matter of who fits my lineup the best or which correlates the best. On FanDuel, there's a little bit different in pricing, but on DraftKings, this is like straight down the order from 7, 68, 67, 66. So going to be kind of tough outside of that. But we'll start top with Devon Achane. He comes in at a pretty expensive price point this week, $9,200 on FanDuel, $8,800 over on DraftKings. He was the chalk last week, ended up doing fairly well, right around 23 points. Didn't really get much usage through the air, which is kind of what killed the ceiling for him, but the floor is also always very good for him too. It did miss some on a wide open touchdown on the goal line at one point, but still a solid day nonetheless. But personally for me, I don't see myself really getting to Achane much at this price point this week because I think the guys are going to have somewhat similar projections for much cheaper price points here. So I'm probably going to be out on Achane, but he's still probably going to project as the RB1, if not close to it. James Cook right now is my favorite if you are spending up like above $7,000. This is just a nut spot versus Cincinnati Bengals. 29.5 implied team total, 5.5 point spread in their favor. They're playing at home. We should get 20 plus opportunities out of James Cook. He's been great this year efficiency wise at 5.3 yards per carry. Doesn't get used in the passing game a ton, but he hasn't really needed it so far. In this matchup versus the Bengals, they're allowing 33.3 points per game of the position. That's dead last, nearly 130 rushing yards, and nearly 50 receiving yards as well. So if you're ever going to play James Cook, this really seems like the spot for it. And I'm honestly surprised he is not above $8,000. On FanDuel, it's really tough at $9,300, but on DraftKings, it's still somewhat easy to play him. And then Bucky Irving, I'm not going to go too in depth on every single one of these players because, like I said, they're basically the exact same. But for Bucky Irving, I do want to mention, did return from injury last week. Had 19 opportunities, which was nice, 17 on the ground, 2 through the air. Did get into the end zone. I like the spot here versus the Saints. They're playing at home, 8.5 point spread. Kind of a similar situation to James Cook, but I do trust James Cook a little bit more because they have a bit of a headed monster there over in Tampa with Rachaad White and Sean Tucker, even though I think we all know Bucky Irving is certainly the most talented of the bunch, but he's still kind of returning from injury. After that, though, I mean, Jacobs, all these guys can see around 20 total opportunities. The matchups are good enough to where I think they're going to be viable. I hate to say it like that simply, but that's really all it is. We're just kind of splitting hairs. Josh Jacobs gets a good spot as a 6.5 point favorite at home. They're going to pound him. He'll get the goal line carries. Chase Brown probably lacks the ceiling of some of these other players, but this is a good spot on the ground versus Buffalo. The only reason I say that is because Joe Burrow, they're going to have to be throwing a lot. They're 5.5 point dogs here. He can get checkdowns. I think the floor is going to be nice. And I really like the price tag over on FanDuel, but not my favorite play in the world. But we have seen the Bills so far this year be very bad versus running back so far for fantasy purposes. Kyrie Williams is a very boring volume play, but with a high total. spread in their favor. If he gets into the end zone, you will like it. If not, you're probably not going to enjoy Kyren Williams. And then Breece Hall, he's pretty much the same play as Chase Brown, in my opinion. Similar price points, both 200 off, whether it be on DraftKings or FanDuel. It's a good spot versus Miami. He can get a few checkdowns to boost that floor. Solid running back. Not elite plays by any means, but at their price points, they will slide into lineups. But I kind of do prefer them more over on FanDuel. Judkins, the Browns' offense is horrendous. Shedeur Sanders has been awful so far. But they are favorites in this game. They are playing at home. We know the weather in Cleveland at this time of the year. The wind off the lake, the colder temperatures. It's a little bit too early for me to look at the weather forecast with it being on Tuesday. But it would not surprise me if we have inclement weather once again in Cleveland this week. And that is the lowest over-under I have seen all season long, and one of the lowest I have ever seen in general. And there's only one guy below 6K this week that I think is viable. It's going to be Ken Walker. He was chalk last week. I personally did not get on it. He just seemed overseemed to me since he's always going to split with Charbonnet. I just never really liked playing Kenneth Walker myself. But there is a severe lack of RB value this week. So if you need somebody below 6K or somebody below 7K on FanDuel, Walker is still going to get opportunity. We're at 4.6 yards per carry this year. When he's getting the volume, it's not horrible. We're averaging 15 opportunities per game. He'll get a couple of targets. It is a plus matchup versus Atlanta, high implied team total. The touchdown chances are going to be there, but he is a very annoying roster since Zach Charbonnet does exist. Okay, back to the build here. I know I didn't talk about Jonathan Taylor. If you want to sign up for him, be my guest, but I do prefer Devon H. Hand just a little bit more, which some of my people think I'm crazy, but I'm probably not even spending up there anyway. James Cook and below is basically my RB pool this week. But yeah, since we're going with this Bengals stack here, we're going to play James Cook on the other side of that, and I just love the spot versus Cincy. And after that, we kind of have our pick of the litter, whether we're going to go down to Bucky Irving or all the way down to Judkins or maybe Ken Walker if we need the extra savings. For right now, I'm going to play Judkins, but if we have to drop to Walker at the end to fit something, I'll do that. All right, so for wide receiver, we usually don't take too much time here because, we talked about the stacks we talked about the quarterbacks. It just directly coincides with our pass catchers for the most part. So since in this specific build we have Joe Burrow. As much as I love Adams, as much as I love Puka or JSN this week, I got to get my points from Burrow from somebody, so it's going to be Jamar Chase. That's going to be the first guy I'll plug in for this specific build. But if you have Stafford, please look at one of the Rams wide receivers. I don't know if you're going to be able to afford both. It's very difficult to do so. Or if you have Sam Darnold, you absolutely have to play JSN because there's no way Sam Darnold is getting optimal without JSN. Other than that, we do have the rest of our stacks here, basically. So if you're playing Baker Mayfield, Emeka Buka, or Chris Godwin, who we did see have some nice usage last week, did drop a touchdown as well. The box score definitely could have looked a bit better for him. The injury situation we have to monitor is Marvin Harrison Jr. If Maz DeMarv is out, Michael Wilson becomes a pretty premium play, especially over on FanDuel at $5,700. Like, of all the players we have listed here, there's only one person cheaper on FanDuel than Michael Wilson, and that's Pat Bryant, who I'll talk about in a second. But Michael Wilson would definitely be one of the top wide receivers over on FanDuel and DraftKings. He's still kind of in that mid-range where there's still some other pretty solid plays. Still would be good, but definitely would prefer over on FanDuel. Chris Olave on Baker Mayfield run backs. Jalen Waddle, if you happen to go with the Tyrod Taylor stack. I'm not going to play two of myself. But if you go Taylor, AD Mitchell, running back with Jalen Waddle, I know it was a down week last week, but I wouldn't let that deter you from playing him in the future, especially on FanDuel. Once again, another really nice price point over there. But one of the value options I do want to talk about is Pat Bryant down there at $3,400. I think he's a bit too cheap this week. And we have kind of seen this Denver wide receiver group get a bit closer to each other. It's no longer just the Cortland Sutton show. I know he caught the touchdown on Sunday night, but Troy Franklin's getting more involved. Pat Bryant especially is getting more involved. We saw him run 70% of the snaps last week, 6-7 targets the previous 2 weeks at $3,400 for a guy that's basically in a full-time role now at the wide receiver position, and honestly does not look too bad. At a punt play at $3,400 to open some things up in our lineup, I don't think that looks bad at all. Okay, back to the build here. So I'm just going to plug in Jamar Chase. I don't know if we're going to be able to afford T. Higgins or if he's even going to play. I'm hoping he does. I don't know if we've had an update since I've started talking. Yeah, still remains in the concussion protocol. That was yesterday's update at 3:30, so it looks like we haven't had anything from today. If he does play, he's $6,200. We could probably fit him in. I'm not 100% confident on that. We'll leave him in for right now, but I'm sure I'm going to have to do a little bit of finagling with it. And tight end's pretty depressing this week. Honestly, the passing attack for almost every team this week is pretty not great. I was looking at the passing yards props out of Vegas, and there is nothing. I mean, the highest prop this week for passing yards is Joe Burrow, and it's only 250. Other than that, it's Dak Prescott at 260. That's on the Thursday game, unfortunately. But the rest of the quarterbacks, it ain't too pretty this week. So, I mean, I guess that kind of coincides why none of these stacks really feel that fun and why Tyrod Taylor and a couple of Jets don't even seem that bad either. But as for the tight ends, not many this week. Trey McBride, the fun's over. I mean, the value is completely gone. We were getting Trey McBride in the 6K range at some point. That was fun. We were all getting fantasy points. We were all cheering and dancing. And now, even when he gets 20 points, it's like, man, I kind of need a little bit more. I mean, the upside's always there. He's going to get the targets. And if Marvin Harrison's out, even better. The bonus is always in play. You always have to think of him as the wide receiver 1, though, at $8,000. But the problem is, with the pricing is this week, it's going to be a really, really tough fit. Brock Bowers, I do like. We did see Zach Ertz have a pretty big game versus Denver. They're elite outside. They have PS2 back. The way you can beat them a little bit is at least over the middle, which Brock Bowers tight end position. We know he's a freak. He's amazing. I mean, him and Trey McBride, two of the best tight ends in the NFL, and we are getting Bowers at $2,000 discount. Now, of course, his quarterback maybe kind of deserves that $2,000 discount with how bad Geno Smith is. And the low implied team total, of course, but I don't hate Bowers for the discount. After that, we're kind of just punting a little bit. Dalton Kincaid, if he is back, since he has been horrible versus tight ends, they are dead last, allowing 23.7 points per game, which is an absurd amount for a tight end, nearly 100 receiving yards. So if Kincaid is back, this would be a fantastic time to play him. And it would fit perfectly with our stack as well. Juwan Johnson's still getting targets. It's not really ever fun playing any of the New Orleans Saints, but Juwan and Olave are still pretty consistent options in that offense. We'll have to see what happens with Alvin Kamara this week. Brenton Strange gets a pretty weak Indy team versus tight ends. That's pretty much been the case over the past couple of seasons, and he's been pretty good in his return the past couple of weeks. And Harold Fandon, he's a really talented tight end, but he's in a bad offense with a bad quarterback, but he can still make plays happen. Caught a nice touchdown last week. This is a very, very gross game, but at his price point, I still think he's viable with the volume that he gets. All right, so let's finish off this monstrosity of a build here, but we're going to go directly to defense so we can see what actually kind of money we had to work with. And what's the first thing I always do? Scroll to the bottom and try to find the first viable defense. Unfortunately, no min-price Titans this week. I feel like it's something we always do, but they're playing the Browns, so they got, I think, hiked up to around $3,000. So first viable one, honestly, the Raiders, which I'm not going to do it this time, but at $2,000, they're playing at home. There could be worse things out there is all I am saying. We're going to go a little bit higher. Honestly, none of these look extremely exciting, but we do have the Commanders versus J.J. McCarthy, which is always going to be an option, or the Titans versus the Browns. You really can't go wrong with either. We'll click on the Commanders for now, but that is totally interchangeable. So now we have $4,000, which is not a lot. So I think we're actually going to have to use Pat Bryant as that punt option. So we'll do it at $3,400. It makes things a little bit easier, but man, we do not have much to work with, unfortunately. So we're definitely not going to get that third running back in the flex spot. But at tight end, we're going to have to try to keep it around $4,000. So no Bowers, no Trey McBride for us, unfortunately. We could fit Kincaid, but I don't know if he's playing or not. So we'll just kind of keep that up in the air. But honestly, Brenton Strange, just to get a piece of the Indy Jacksonville game. I know we haven't really talked about it at all. And it's just because there's so many options on both teams to where it's probably a good game, but for fantasy purposes, kind of tough. But Strange or Johnson here seems like the move. We'll go with Brenton Strange for right now. Leaves us $4,800. I think that can get us maybe one of the Jets wide receivers. There's obviously not a running back that we could play in this range, but if we look at who's available, Mooney, DJ Moore, Tucker, nothing really exciting there. But A.D. Mitchell, I wouldn't mind at 46. John Mechie at 45 also wouldn't be too bad of an option there. So we could just plug in A.D. Mitchell. If you want to upgrade the defense a little bit, you could. We could afford Judkins still, which is nice. I am kind of curious if we went down to like a Ken Walker, if that would make a huge difference. I'm not really a big Ken Walker fan, but that would give you $5,600, which Michael Wilson, if Marvin Harrison's out, obviously that'd be a nice little upgrade. You pick a litter of these Denver wide receivers. We already have Pat Bryant, so I don't think that makes too much sense there. But let's just put in the original. And yeah, Titans defense, since we have Judkins. I forgot about that. Wouldn't make the most sense. So, all right. Right now, the premise is we have Joe Burrow double stacked with Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. We have James Cook on the other side of that game. Quinshawn Judkins, Pat Bryant as a punt. Brenton Strange, I do like that spot for cheap versus the Indy defense. And the Commanders defense, Titans defense, whatever defense you want to plug in is fine. It's defense. It's unprojectable. And the flex spot, that is up to your imagination. So with that being said, that's all for today's video. So I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, or even if you didn't, make sure you like down below. Scratch if you're brand new. Any questions, comments, concerns, leave them down below. I'm more than happy to answer them. Wish you the best, and I'll see y'all next time.